a modern aircraft took off, and moments later it became a fireball. No war, no terrorism. Just standard procedures, a distress signal, and instant collective death. In a flash, dreams of studying a broad reunion or starting anew were incinerated under a crimson sky. Hundreds perished without knowing what went wrong. One man survived not because of the system, but through a brutal twist of fate. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a ruthless test of our technology, our oversight, and the very conscience of aviation. When safety is reduced to a slogan, every boarding pass becomes a gamble with death. Let's start at the moment of takeoff, where tragedy quietly took its first breath. A tragedy born from a blue sky. Aviation disasters never begin with the crash. They begin with ignored signals. I-71 was not just a fallen flight. It was a dark chapter in the modern history of flight. When the Boeing 787 lifted off at 1:38 p.m., no one imagined that within 90 seconds, 241 souls would become a statistic. This wasn't fate. It was the consequence of a system rotting from within, painted over by corporate slogans about international safety standards. Behind the sleek cabin doors was a culture too arrogant to see its own cracks. And cracks in aviation always find the fastest way down. Security cameras captured the moment the plane burst into flames over a residential area. The aircraft's tail struck the roof of a medical college dormitory. Those eating lunch, studying, or prepping for clinical rotations became collateral damage in an industry that had long lost the right to public trust. This wasn't just a one-off crash. It was a collapse of what was once national pride, a flagship carrier, a seasoned flight crew, and cutting-edge aircraft, all reduced to rubble. When a Dreamliner becomes a nightmare, it tells us one thing. Something far bigger than metal has failed. No one escapes the scrutiny of conscience. No excuse can justify how a modern Boeing 787 flown by experienced pilots in good weather crashes like a stone hurled by careless hands. If India's aviation authorities won't confront this honestly, if international partners don't dig deep, this lesson will be buried alongside the debris. As an aviation expert, I say this with urgency: we must break it down to the bone. Not just the jet, but every assumption we've made about safety, oversight, and truth. The time for mourning is past.
We have an unidentified
The time for accountability has begun. The doomed journey seconds between sky and fire. The Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner, one of aviation's most advanced aircraft, took off with confidence, but would never reach cruising altitude. Within seconds, its fate was sealed. With more than 200 people on board, including families, students, and children, the aircraft began to lose altitude rapidly. It never left the airport's shadow. A jet designed for transcontinental flight crashed before even leaving domestic airspace. This wasn't turbulence. This was technical death. And in an era when we trust machines more than men, this mechanical betrayal forces us to question everything we thought we knew about flight safety. From the flight manifest a blend of nationalities: British Indian, Portuguese Canadian. Some were off to chase dreams, others just returning home. But none of them had bought a ticket to die. The plane didn't fall from the sky in bad weather. There was no missile, no hijacking. Just a steep climb, a Mayday call, and silence. Investigators say the plane barely reached 625 feet before it began its fatal plunge. For a Dreamliner, that's barely enough altitude to retract the landing gear. This wasn't a crash in motion. It was an eruption of failure mid-takeoff. This flight was supposed to touch down at London Gatwick. Instead, it burned into the ground near a college dorm. The collision was so intense that metal cut through brick like a blade through paper. Local witnesses described a roar, a shudder, and then hell. In modern aviation, every minute after takeoff is controlled, recorded, and backed by triple redundant systems. So how does a wide-body jet fall from the sky like a paper kite? That's the question the world is now asking. And the only thing more terrifying than the crash is the idea that no one saw it coming. The plane wasn't old. The pilots weren't green, so who failed? The Dreamliner that crashed in Ahmedabad was barely a decade old, still within what the aviation industry considers its golden operational lifespan. The world had never recorded a fatal crash involving a 787-8 before. That's what makes this event so violently sobering. It didn't just destroy a jet, it shattered trust. People assume old planes fall from the sky. This one was young, and it flew with confidence until it didn't. If a modern aircraft flying in good weather with no apparent external threat can self-destruct in its own sky, what else is waiting to fail? Right above our heads, the captain was a seasoned Air Force lieutenant colonel with over 8,000 flight hours. His co-pilot had logged more than 1,000. This wasn't an amateur cockpit. This was a team any airline would trust, and they followed protocol. They issued a Mayday, tried to regain control, but the plane didn't listen. That forces us to what if trained pilots in a new aircraft under normal weather still crash spectacularly. Then, what invisible hand is pushing these planes down? It's no longer a matter of pilot error. It's a matter of systemic betrayal, hiding behind layers of unchecked confidence. Aviation safety depends on three pillars: human skill, machine integrity, and procedural discipline. If the pilots didn't err, and the aircraft had no prior faults, the final pillar must be questioned. What inspection failed? What maintenance step was skipped? What warning was dismissed? These crashes don't erupt from nowhere. They are built brick by brick, through ignored memos, silenced engineers and managers eager to meet deadlines over safety margins. When all three pillars crack in silence, they don't make noise, they make impact. And that impact hit the streets of Ahmedabad like a warning the industry refuses to hear. A Mayday call lost in the void. When a pilot sends out a Mayday, it's a global red flag. Every second counts. It's the loudest cry a cockpit can issue. Yet on this flight, the distress signal vanished into silence. Within moments, all communication was lost. No follow-up, no rescue directive, just silence, then flames. This wasn't just a failure of machinery. It was a collapse in the safety web supposedly surrounding every commercial aircraft. When a Mayday echoes unanswered, it means more than failure. It signals that the lifeline we believed in doesn't exist when we need it most. It's a betrayal at 600 feet. Mayday isn't metaphor, it's law. Internationally recognized. When uttered, it demands action, coordination, urgency. But AIMA's Mayday triggered nothing that saved lives. Why? Was there too little time, or did ground teams freeze waiting for confirmation while lives burned? If safety protocols only work under ideal conditions, then they're not safety protocols. They're simulations. Real safety must thrive in chaos, not collapse within it. If this crash proved anything, it's that our emergency systems may look good in manuals, but fracture when seconds decide fate. And no amount of procedure can compensate for a system that answers Mayday with silence. Every unanswered distress call is a siren of systemic failure. If ground control couldn't respond effectively, then what was all the training for? What were the simulations preparing us to do? Observe helplessly. When the Mayday didn't prevent death, it transformed from a tool of rescue to an indictment. It forced us to admit that our safety nets might be illusion, and illusions cost lives. If the loudest alarm in aviation can be muted by miscoordination or delay, then we must face a chilling truth the next time we fly. We're all trusting a ghost network. The wreckage wasn't just metal, it was truth laid bare. When the Dreamliner slammed into a residential area, it wasn't just a crash. It was aviation's mirror shattering in public. Fires consumed buildings. Metal was twisted into unnatural forms. The horror wasn't in theory anymore. It lay in full view, burned bodies, crying families, debris flung across classrooms. And in that chaos came clarity. Safety claims are meaningless unless they hold through impact. Every Banner training module and safety pledge must now answer to the wreckage. Because when the aircraft fell, it didn't just crush concrete. It crushed the illusion that we were ready for something like this. We weren't. Over 200 dead confirmed. But the death toll isn't just a number. It's a question: were they passengers or civilians? No one can say for sure. Some victims were inside the aircraft. Others were in dorm rooms, completely unaware their lives were about to end. That's the curse of aviation failure. It spreads beyond the runway. It pulls in the innocent. It burns lives that never boarded. That alone should send shockwaves across policy boards. Because if a plane falling from the sky is allowed to erase blocks of life indiscriminately, then our skies are no longer corridors of connection. They're traps. Ambulances screamed through Ahmedabad. Hospitals overflowed. Doctors ran triage on the curb. The living fought for breath while the dead smoldered in shadows. There was no order, just urgency. But that urgency didn't come from preparedness. It came from panic. The kind of chaos that exposes how thin our emergency response truly is. Despite drills, policies, and paperwork, we were caught off guard. And that's the most terrifying truth of all. Even after decades of aviation advancement. One wrong climb, one malfunction, one unanswered call. And we're back at zero. Improvising with ash. The government responded, but far too late to matter. India's political and emergency apparatus did mobilize, but only after the worst had passed. Ministers arrived. Control rooms were activated. Hotlines lit up. But for those who burned alive in the hostel or suffocated under debris, it was all just theater. Response must be proactive, not reactive. If your system only activates once the bodies are counted, then it's not a rescue mechanism. It's a recovery protocol. We need to stop praising speed after the fact and start asking why systems failed in the first minute. Because that's when lives are saved or lost. And here they were lost. The scene resembled a war zone. National disaster units, paramilitary forces, local police all converged on one burning block. But unity without coordination is just noise. It doesn't matter how many boots hit the ground if no one's in charge of direction. Every second of confusion meant another victim unattended, another fire spreading another chance to show global readiness lost. And when leaders offer condolences without accountability, it turns tragedy into photo op. The world doesn't need their tears, it needs change. The crash site didn't demand sympathy, it screamed for reform. And reform was not on the first truck. Statements poured in from officials. Unimaginable loss. Deeply saddened. We stand united, but words are not antidotes. They don't cool fires or identify remains. The public doesn't need poets. It needs systems that work before the mourning begins. If it takes an international catastrophe for a nation to reevaluate its safety protocols, then governance has failed preemptively. And while flags lower to half-mast families, lower bodies into the ground. That's the gap we need to bridge, not with words, but with frameworks. The kind that prevent crashes instead of eulogizing them afterward. Global solidarity doesn't bring back the dead. World leaders reacted with grace and sorrow. Condolences came from every corner: Europe, Asia, the Americas. But sympathy is a soft currency in the face of fire. It comforts, yes, but it doesn't rebuild dormitories. It doesn't decontaminate blood-stained sidewalks. And it surely doesn't resurrect the bodies lining Ahmedabad's morgues. Global unity is beautiful, but meaningless if it ends at hashtags and televised empathy. This was not just India's loss. It was aviation's collective failure. And unless we treat it that way, unless every airline manufacturer and regulator learns from it, the next Mayday will echo through a new capital. It's easy to send flowers, harder to send investigators, easier to issue statements than policy amendments. But the true allies are those who help trace every wire, interrogate every log file, and hold every certificate issuer to account. That's the kind of solidarity we need. If international voices don't translate into forensic collaboration, then they are just well-dressed distractions. The Dreamliner fell in India, but its blueprint, its engines, its certifications all came from a global web. If one node fails, the net breaks. This tragedy must be globalized in scrutiny, not just sympathy. Otherwise, the pattern will repeat. Solidarity must demand action. Not just candles in town squares, but black box analysis, emergency audits, pilot retraining. The aviation world talks a lot about shared skies. Now it's time to act like it. This crash must become the fulcrum for sweeping change across borders, industries, and bureaucracies. Or else the next time flames rise from a runway, the world will again gather to mourn a problem it never dared to solve. Enough unity in death. What we need is collaboration in prevention. Otherwise, all we've built is a civilization that reacts beautifully, but prepares poorly. The black box won't lie, but will we listen? In the wreckage lies the only survivor that always speaks the black box. It holds the flight's final seconds' mechanical data, cockpit voices, and every warning beep. And while officials posture, the black box waits, offering truth without agenda. But truth is meaningless unless we choose to hear it. Too often, black box findings are buried under red tape politics or face-saving bureaucracy. What will this one reveal? A stall warning ignored. A flap misconfiguration. Dual engine failure. Whatever it says, it will be brutal. And the real question is, will we bury it or let it expose the rot? Recovery teams know the stakes. If the box is intact, and early reports suggest it is, it becomes the forensic key to a national trauma. But interpreting it requires independence. No stakeholder should be allowed to shape the narrative. Manufacturers, regulators, and airlines alike must step back. Let raw data speak, and let consequences follow. If we dilute black box findings to protect reputations, then we choose comfort over justice. Aviation cannot afford comfort. It demands bloodless honesty. Because one buried fact, one softened report, and we set the next tragedy in motion, today's fire becomes tomorrow's precedent. The Dreamliner's fall was sudden. Its data shouldn't be. Every lever pulled, every throttle touched, every cockpit word must be scrutinized without compromise. Investigators must resist the pressure to produce a clean report. The only clean outcome is one that prevents recurrence. The world will watch, families, journalists, survivors, and cynics alike. And if the final report dances around hard truths, it won't just insult the dead. It will endanger the living. This is no time for diplomacy. It's time for dissection. The black box may be buried, but its story must rise. Unfiltered, unedited, unforgiving. Accountability isn't optional. It's overdue. For years, Air India racked up fines, violations, and warnings, each one a spark waiting for fuel. Unqualified pilots, mismanaged schedules, procedural lapses. Regulators scolded, then backed off. The airline promised change, then backslid. And now hundreds are dead. This is not misfortune. This is causality. When corners are cut in aviation, the blade lands on passengers. Every prior infraction should now be read as a prophecy. And if Air India escapes this storm with PR apologies and compensation checks, then we've legalized negligence. Accountability is not vengeance. It's a signal that rules still mean something. Or else they don't. The regulatory body too must answer. Where were they as warnings piled up? Why were repeat violations met with mere fines? If oversight becomes optional, it isn't oversight. It's complicity. Tragedies like AI-171 don't happen in isolation. They are the final link in a long, visible chain. And unless we sever that chain, with real consequence, it will keep forming. Aviation safety cannot rely on trust. It must be enforced, audited, and corrected ruthlessly. Otherwise, safety becomes marketing, and death becomes the invoice. A regulator who fears industry backlash more than public loss is no regulator at all. And the Tata Group, now Air India's owner, must go beyond symbolic gestures. Rebuilding a dormitory or paying hospital bills is the bare minimum. What the world wants to see is internal reform transparency and an overhaul of the systems that allowed this crash to happen. Compensation may ease grief, but only accountability cures the disease. If Tata truly wants to honor the victims, it must do something airlines fear most. Open the books, publish the flaws, and commit to the kind of change that costs money but saves lives. That's the real reparation, not checks. Courage. If we forget this, we deserve what comes next. This tragedy must not be normalized. We cannot let it dissolve into headlines, hashtags, or thoughts and prayers. Because if we do, we consent to its repetition. The next crash won't come as a shock, it'll come as a cycle. And that is the true disgrace. Planes aren't supposed to fall from the sky in calm weather on routine flights with experienced crews. When they do, it's not an accident. It's a failure to learn, a failure to act. And if governments, corporations, and regulators walk away from this without change, then they are not just guilty. They are complicit. To passengers, this is a wake-up call. Safety isn't a guarantee. It's a gamble shaped by layers of human decision. Ask hard questions. Demand transparency. Stop accepting delays, reroutes, or unexplained errors as normal. Every sloppy repair, every rushed takeoff, every silent warning light is a vote cast against your survival. This isn't paranoia, it's preparation. And if we want skies that don't kill, we must become flyers who won't settle for silence. Trust must be earned, not assumed. And every passenger has the right to demand that before boarding their next flight. This was not a storm. It was a mirror. And in that reflection, the aviation world saw its true face. Proud, under-regulated, overconfident. The sky is not safe by default. It is made safe, maintained safe, and kept safe by diligence. When that breaks, the cost is human. And the next time you board a plane, remember the system you trust. With your life is only as strong as the last crash it learned from. Or didn't. Choose memory over denial. Choose outrage over passivity. Because those who forget AI-171 will board its twin someday, and never let. No one expected that takeoff to mark the beginning of unspeakable horror. A state-of-the-art jet fell from the sky, not due to war, not due to weather, but because of blind spots in responsibility. Technology didn't fail. Humans did. The protocols were in place, but neglected. Hundreds burned not just in fuel, but in a blaze of negligence passed down through every operational layer. If we stay silent now, the next AI-171 is only a matter of time. And next time, the passengers could be anyone, including you. This isn't the end. This is the warning.